Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to this week's Everyday Inclusion and Belonging, where we chat about all things diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity. And I was compelled this week to talk about language because right now, we are at a moment in time where the language that we use and the power of words is more evident than ever. One of the things that we did at Moxie, which is what we usually do, we created a tool. So I will attach this. It's a specific language and inclusion guide called 19 for 19 that is about 19 words in particular that during COVID-19 are really, really powerful. And it's interesting because historically we know that pandemics like this are a really powerful time for hate to thrive because fear creates hate. You know, we want something to blame. You can't blame a virus that you can't see. And so we tend to, as humans, want to put that fear on something, and we end up putting it on other people. And so a lot of the words that we're going to talk about here are how that if we allow those words to be used and different groups to be targeted, we allow that hate to thrive. And right now, the power of our words for inclusion is really extraordinary. And right now, I would urge all of us to be a stand for inclusion because, again, the pandemic is showing both the beauty of humanity and the ugly side of humanity. And so let's use our words to bring people together versus our words to allow hate to thrive. On that note, if I would ask everyone who considers themselves an ally to check in with people of color in your lives, particularly African-American and Black folks in the US right now. There have been several incidents of unspeakable violence in their community, and we all need to be an ally. Same thing with Asian and Asian American. It was actually interesting. Let me get the exact stat for you. Stop AAPI opened up a reporting center where Asian Americans could report hate crimes. In the first 2 weeks, they had over 1,100 reports of coronavirus-related discrimination, and found that women were harassed at twice the rate of men, and that children and youth were involved in 6.3% of those incidents. So everything from microaggressions to all-out hate crimes, we need to be a stand for inclusion. We need to be allies. A small part of that is around language, and that's what we're going to dig in on today. You know, it's interesting. We did 19, and I said that I was going to highlight 5 today. I don't know that I'm going to be able to keep it at 5. We'll see. And I will. Some of these we've brought up in past sessions, and I think they bear repeating. I'll post this, and you'll see we actually, if you go out, I created a couple of articles that broke this up as well, but I'll post this as a downloadable tool for you so that you can access it, share it with your teams, use it as a tool to actually start conversations. Because again, the work that we do around creating inclusion, around creating belonging is every day. It's the everyday actions that we take, including these words. So a couple that I think it's really important for people to understand are ableism and ageism. And ableism is discrimination or prejudice against individuals with disabilities in favor of able-bodied people. What that looks like right now, and then I'll say ageism, prejudice or discrimination on the grounds of a person's age. A system of beliefs, attitudes, and actions that stereotype or discriminate against individuals or groups on the basis of their age. So how ageism and ableism are both showing up right now are people saying like, not a big deal. It's just impacting people with underlying health conditions, or it's just impacting old people. That's an opportunity to be an ally. And we're going to talk about ally as our next word. So an ally is a person who supports a group other than their own. So as somebody who is able-bodied, I can be an ally and speak up when I hear that language. As a person who doesn't fit that 60 or above, right, I can speak up when I hear people being onlyed. Because imagine being onlyed when what we're talking about is actually life or death consequences. So being an ally right now, and I'm gonna use this as one of our first words and then a wrap up with it. In practice, during this pandemic, it means that if you witness somebody speaking in that way, right, you say, hey, you know what, I don't know if you realize it, but there's a real ableist undertone to what you're saying, right? Imagine if you were somebody that did have an underlying condition. Is their life worth less than yours? I don't think you understood the impact of your words, right? Because we always want to give that space. Remember, we talk about no blame and shame, more around curiosity and being open and engaging people in that, because some of these are subtle, which is actually going to take me to, I'm going to flip around in the guide here, microaggressions. So if you're not familiar, psychiatrist and Professor Chester M. Pierce in 1970 coined this phrase to describe tiny, casual, almost imperceptible insults and degradation often felt by marginalized groups. They're brief, commonplace, daily, verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostility, derogatory or negative sights and insults to the target people or groups. So a microaggression right now is I see somebody who is Asian American, Pacific Islander, whatever it may be, and I get up and I walk out of the room. Or I say something, I use another one of the words that is one of those that if you hear, you need to be an ally and stop in his tracks, and that's Chinese flu, right? Do not under any circumstances use Chinese flu or Chinese virus. And if you hear somebody use that, it's an opportunity to be an ally, because that is when I talked about those spikes in hate crimes and the spikes in microaggressions, that attaches an ethnicity to this virus, right? And it frames the virus as us versus them, right? And that, again, somebody that ability to hate and to want to blame. Listen, y'all, everybody's impacted by this. We are literally, this virus is showing us how connected and tied we are. To blame a certain group of people literally makes no sense. And it's very, very dangerous. So there are real consequences from a microaggression all the way through a hate crime. So don't use and don't allow it to be used, and even explain, right? Like here's across history, when we face things like this, it can breed hate because of fear, and we're all afraid, but it doesn't help any of us if we're blaming groups of people. I told you I wasn't gonna be able to limit it to 5 because I think I've already done 5. Another one that is really important to understand right now is social class and classism. So social class is really a division based on social and economic status. And right now, what we're seeing with classism is the prejudice or discrimination on the basis of social class. And for example, right now, that's looking like, right, in coronavirus days, expecting essential workers such as the grocery store employees, sanitation. I think we put a lot of focus on healthcare workers. And in the U.S., I'm using U.S. stats, something like 60% of people are classified as essential workers. And so they don't have, it's either they can't get their unemployment benefits or they have to go to work and put themselves at risk without proper protection. And so that's looking like a lot of us having the privilege to stay at home and to work from home, while many don't. And then, not having paid sick leave, not having a safety net for folks so that classism, when we're talking about this whole idea of safer at home, safe at home, all of those things, for some people, that's simply not an option. And so making sure that we're talking about that and talking about what are we doing to ensure that those folks that are essential workers, often based on socioeconomic status, that they're being shown the same dignity, respect, and protections that we've got in place for those of us that are privileged enough to be able to work more safely at home. Another, our African American, Black, people of color. What's happening right now that we're seeing again with the pandemic is, and oftentimes we're seeing intersectionality between class and race, is that this is much more devastating for communities of color. And that's right, like systems of privilege and systems of racism and things that are coming up. So as we're saying, like, let's get back to work, like let's reopen the economy, all of these things, really being aware about the disparities there and having conversations about how different groups are being impacted differently. We're not all in this together. We're all facing the same thing under very different circumstances, sometimes by race, sometimes by class. I think it's also really, understanding, I talked a little bit about privilege, and I think we actually just need to do a whole session on privilege. It was interesting. I met with a group from GE this morning, and we were talking about this a little bit. It's so fundamental. And I know that we've touched on it with a lot of folks that have been on the series. I think we need to dedicate a whole session to it and understanding it and unpacking it and how you talk about it in a way that people can actually hear. Because right now we are seeing, so privileges are rights or advantages that are given to a whole group of people, right? Based on how society views that whole group. Doesn't mean that I have had it easy, doesn't mean that you haven't worked hard, right? All of those things. It's that I have some advantages. We're seeing those right now because of some systems of privilege. So right now, having a job that allows you to work from home, having access to testing and medical care, having access to when we're looking at even access to technology, internet service, technology, being able to, thinking about folks that have kids, that their kids are at home, and, having help that can, whether that's a spouse or a partner, or, how, single parents versus those that are in a dual caregiver. Like, all of those are privileges. And so thinking about how we can check in with folks that don't have those and be an ally and be an upstander, not a bystander, are really important. I'm going to end with xenophobia. So that's a dislike or prejudice against people from other countries. From Greek, xenos means stranger or foreigner, and phobes meaning fear. So fear or hatred of that which is perceived to be foreign or strange. Right now, and the stats on this are actually pretty staggering. We're seeing xenophobia, which the seeds had already been planted for a couple of years here. We're seeing that, and again, outbreaks create fear, and fear is a key ingredient for racism and xenophobia to thrive. So we need to be allies. We need to think about, have our teams understand language, the power of language, understand the concepts behind these words, and to really use our words as tools for inclusion, and our behaviors, right, as allies, and spending our privilege, and really ensuring that we are all in this together, and that we're checking in on people, and that we can look back, all of us, and say, I did my part to make sure that we all got through this together, and I used language as a tool for good. So, I felt I'll post this. I would love to hear comments or thoughts on any other particular words or phrases that you're seeing right now, that you're seeing either bring people together or drive a wedge, and how we can use, and how you've seen people using words and language as a tool to build inclusion. Thanks, y'all, and see you next week.